In our final video on the cost analysis in the short run, we are going to incorporate marginal cost and the marginal cost curve and what that tells us. But before we dive too deep into that, let's just have a quick review here of what we've looked at so far. We have our total variable cost, average fixed costs. If you don't know how we have derived those averages, I'd suggest going back a couple videos and seeing just what the total costs are when it comes to fixed costs and variable costs alone. You can see here when you add your variable costs, try that again, our variable costs and our fixed cost, that gives us our total cost. That's just the sum between the two. Now let's look at average variable cost, average fixed cost, and average total cost. Well, again, average variable cost is going to be basically your variable cost divided by your output. That's easy enough. And of course, same with total fixed cost. We could just say here, just bring this down and say, average fixed cost equals fixed cost divided by y, output. And I know this is going to come as a complete shocker, but average total cost is basically your total cost, and I'll write it this way, total cost divided by output. So that's where we are so far. Now, how do we actually calculate? Before I actually get into that, let me back up. Let's look at the total variable cost, average variable cost, and average fixed cost. I think this should be actually, let's see, this should be, I made a mistake here, folks. This actually should be average variable, average fixed, average variable, and average total cost. I don't know where I got TVC from, but this should say average total cost. Average total cost. Must not have got much sleep last night. So that's how we derive those curves. You'll notice the average fixed cost curve here in the red. I'm going to go back to black here. Has this sort of steeply declining curve. Looks like this as it approaches minimums. Our average variable costs is kind of U-shaped, right? It's kind of like this. And so when we take these two curves, average variable cost, average fixed cost, to get our average total cost, if you can sort of see the shape of this green curve here, it's like taking this curve here and this curve here and adding them together. And what would you get? Well, you would have a curve that starts off kind of steep, and then, let me try that again. Starts off kind of steep, but then recovers much more quickly, and then will start to go up. Kind of like that. So that would be your average total cost. It's kind of like just taking these two curves and adding them together, and pictorially this is what your result would be. Okay, all fine and well. That brings us to marginal cost. Marginal cost. What is the formula for marginal cost? Marginal cost basically is your change in total cost divided by your change in output. So let's just take this first example right here. If we have, let's see, we had a total cost go from, let's see, 100 to 130, of 130, there we go. So that's going to be a difference of, plus 30. And our output went from 0 to 10 during that period. So what was our marginal cost that we had incurred during that time? Well, 30 over 10, or 3 over 1, equals 3, as denoted by this black dot on the graph. That black dot actually overlaps the first dot on the average variable curve. That is a bit of a coincidence. I don't want you to think that like average variable costs and marginal costs start off at the same point. That's not always the case. It can be. They can be close, obviously, But that's not always the case. They will not equal each other. They can sometimes, but most times they do not. So, what do we notice about this marginal cost curve? First thing that stands out to me is it sort of takes the shape, somewhat takes the shape of what we saw in terms of the marginal product curve in the last section. It's sort of, it starts off to dip, and then it recovers. It starts going back up. So the marginal cost curve sort of looks like a fish hook. It's like a little Nike swish or a fish hook or a check mark, but the marginal cost curve takes on that sort of a shape, and there's a good reason for that, and it's fairly intuitive, as you can see when looking down the data here, what that really means. So let's zoom in a little closer and get a better idea of what the marginal cost curve is telling us. Now, when it comes to the average fixed cost curve here, this is on a continual decline as it approaches minimum. So we're not going to really focus on that. Let me sort of zoom in here really quick. Before I do, I just want to point out, let's see, 60, 70, average variable cost. Look around like the number 60, maybe between 60 and 70 units of output, right about here for average variable cost. Now let's sort of zoom in here and see what we can see. What we're seeing here is, and I'm going to write it above in a little bit after I explain this, so you can have it in the notes. What we're seeing here, and it's not really to scale or specifications, but what we're kind of seeing here is when the marginal cost curve is increasing. When the marginal cost is increasing, actually, I want to put that, let me put that in a little bit of a different way here. Let me do it this way. I think it's going to be easier to explain. Let's say the marginal cost curve is, let's say that it is greater. Well, first let's start off. Let's say the marginal cost curve is less than our average variable cost curve. That means the black line here is below the blue line here. That's when marginal cost is less than average variable cost. So when that is the case, when the marginal cost curve is below average variable cost, below that blue line, when that is the case, that signifies to us that average variable costs are still declining. They're still declining. However, if the marginal cost curve is greater than the average variable cost curve, that's going to tell us what? Average variable costs are increasing. They are now increasing. So if that's the case, what can we infer from these 2 points? Well, basically, if marginal cost is crossing the the black curve is crossing the blue average variable cost curve, then average variable cost is at its lowest point, lowest point. Or you could say average variable cost is at minimums. So that's one rule when it comes to, or a handful of rules when it comes to the average variable cost curve as it relates to the marginal cost curve. And let me jot that down up top really quick. Okay, now that we have that established and up in the notes, let's zoom in on this graph once again here. So what do we have? Well, we have passed that minimum point of the average variable cost curve, and wouldn't you know it, our marginal costs are increasing. They are increasing. Our average variable costs are going up as well. So, maybe we should probably stop production at this point. Well, let's think that over, because we still have to account for average total cost, and where the marginal cost, the black marginal cost curve, and the blue average variable cost curve intersect. Where they intersect is an interesting place to look. Right here. There we go. Now, something interesting going on here. Our variable costs are starting to go up. And you can kind of see here, as I said earlier on, that's sort of a constant with average fixed costs. Average fixed costs are always, declining this way, right? So if we intersect our marginal cost and average cost curve here, we go up the graph here and look at average total cost. Well, what is average total cost doing? It's still declining. Average total cost is still going down. So if average total cost, let's put it this way, if marginal cost curve is less than your average total cost curve, then your average total costs are still declining or decreasing, as you can sort of see by the part of this curve here. So do we stop production? No, because the total cost is all in, everything that we have to pay, right? So we're going to continue to move up the marginal cost curve a little bit in order to keep producing, because the average total costs are still going down for each additional unit that we produce. So let me make that note up top here really quick. And here we go. Probably a lot to digest. I just wanted to write it down and get it over with. But you can see here I wrote, it's sort of the same as number 3. If marginal costs are less than average costs, and average cost is the same as average total costs are still going down. I think we can see that right here. If this marginal cost curve is below average total cost, and bear with me a moment. This is not to scale because we're looking at increments of output in tens. But let's just assume for a moment that this crosses the marginal cost curve, crosses the average cost curve at the minimum point of the average cost curve, the green curve. So let's back out again. However, if marginal cost is greater than average total cost, then the average cost is increasing, as we can see here. And obviously here, average total cost is now going up. If marginal cost and average cost are sort of intersecting, again, as I mentioned a second ago, the average cost curve is at its minimum. And at that point, any further production beyond the point I highlighted a second ago, just right, I'm going to go this way, right here, any further production beyond that point will incur increased net costs for each additional unit of output in total. So basically, if you're going to produce beyond that point where the total cost and marginal cost curves intersect, it's going to cost you money. And as a matter of fact, it's going to essentially be more costly to produce than it is to just kind of stick with where the total cost and marginal cost curves intersect. So we're going to start to lose a little bit of money after we pass that point, much how we started to lose productivity in absolute terms when we were looking at the labor side of things. So this is where we wouldn't want to stop. The average variable cost curve here, we don't want to stop there quite yet, because our average total costs are still declining. We still have a little bit of room. To work with here, from this point on the curve up to this point of the curve. Let me use a different color here, to this point of the curve, right? We can sort of maybe from, say, what is this, like 65 or something? We can still sort of maybe maybe 4, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7, maybe 8 additional units of output until we cross that point where the average cost curve or average total cost curve equals the marginal cost curve. So that basically concludes our discussion on cost analysis in the short run. Before long, we'll start incorporating revenue and price into this discussion, and we'll start to see where we actually should produce, given what price and demand look like. Right now, we're just looking at costs, but where in the world would we produce if we don't know what price is and we don't know what demand is, right? And that's going to be coming up in the next section. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Drop a comment in the comment box, please. If you see any errors or notice any errors with this video, also please let me know. I'd appreciate it. Hopefully this makes sense. And I will see you in the next video. Cheers.